There's one simple habit that could save you from getting lost, but a lot of hikers never think to do it. Even experienced hikers can get this one wrong and turn around because they miss this basic trick. But here's the best part. It's effortless. And if you ever need to backtrack, it could make all the difference. I recently asked my audience of 15,000 plus hikers for their best track wisdom. Real advice from people who've been out there making mistakes, learning the hard way, and figuring out what actually works. Some of these tips might surprise you, some might even challenge what you thought you knew. But trust me, these will change how you hike for the better. Hi there, welcome to the channel. I'm Mauser and I've been hiking for over 34 years, guiding hundreds of people across all kinds of terrain. I've tested gear, I've seen every type of mistake, and I've learned what actually works out on the track. And let me tell you that some of the best advice doesn't come from gear companies or guidebooks. It comes from hikers like you. So let's dive into the top hiking tips from the community, from the Mauser community. Starting with a huge mistake most hikers don't even realize they're making. The one mistake that gets hikers lost. Have you ever been out on a walk, on your way back to your car perhaps, following the track back and suddenly thought, hang on, was it this way? Was it that way? Which way was it? Well, Abe Francis 4137 has a simple fix. Look behind you regularly so you know what the track looks like if you need to backtrack. This is a fantastic tip. It's one I've recommended before, and it's a great tip because trails do look completely different when you're on the way back when you turn around. If you've ever had to retrace your steps or backtrack, you know that sinking feeling that you can get when everything seems unfamiliar. By glancing back every so often, you create a sort of mental map of the track in reverse. And that tiny habit, it could be the difference between confidently finding your way back or getting completely discombobulated. Combobulate, is that a word? I don't know, but you know what I mean, getting confused. And while we're speaking of second guessing, well, let's talk about waterproof boots because a lot of hikers swear by them, but are they really the best choice? The waterproof boot myth. Now, maybe waterproof boots, they're not as good as you think. James 01 points out a harsh reality. Don't worry about waterproof boots. They all get wet eventually and take forever and a day to dry. Instead, wear what's comfy for you and get waterproof socks instead. Vaseline on leather boots does help though. And honestly, well, James, he's not totally wrong. Well, James 01, I mean, he's not totally wrong. You've got a few options here. You can stick with waterproof boots and accept that eventually they'll get soaked through. You can wear regular boots or breathable track shoes and pair them with waterproof socks. Or you can go for leather boots and treat them with a water repellent like Snow Seal or similar boot treatment products. Personally, I've found that waterproof socks work well, but your feet can still get wet from sweat. So it really comes down to personal preference and the conditions you are hiking in. But one thing's for sure, in truly wet conditions, nothing stays dry forever, not even waterproof boots. And while we're speaking of boots, well, let's move on to the next one, which might help you rest a little bit between steps. The rest step. Have you ever been halfway up a steep climb, your legs are burning, you're wondering, why am I doing this to myself? Well, here's the thing. There is a simple technique that can make those brutal ascents feel a little bit easier. It's called the rest step, and it's straight out of the classic mountaineering guide called Mountaineering the Freedom of the Hills. At McGov71 swears by it. The rest step. This is regarded as the single most important mountaineering technique from Mountaineering Freedom of the Hills. It makes treks that used to ruin me so much easier. And McGov71 is absolutely right. Here's how the rest step actually works. As you step uphill, fully straighten your back leg and briefly lock your knee before taking the next step. Step. This shifts your weight from your muscles to your bones, giving your legs a tiny little break. Over time, these little micro rests on the way up, they really add up, reducing fatigue and making steeper climbs feel a lot easier. Now, at first, it might feel a little awkward, kind of like walking in slow motion. But once you get into the rhythm, it becomes second nature. And I've used this technique on some of my toughest walks over the years, and trust me, it really does work. It is a great technique. If your legs ever feel like they're going to go and strike halfway up a hill, give the rest step a go. You'll be amazed at how much further you can go with less effort. And speaking of saving energy, what about saving weight in your pack? I mean, that's something we all love to do. No camp shoes, no problem. Now, most hikers, including myself, bring extra camp shoes for use around camp. But what if you could ditch them entirely and still keep your feet warm and dry? Well, Endeavour Forever, one of the subscribers who responded to this lovely little survey, shares a surprisingly effective ultra lightweight alternative. And as they say, this certainly isn't for everyone. and I haven't come across anyone else doing it yet. Sounds interesting. But if you really want to save weight and space, skip camp shoes or those flimsy wafer thin thongs. Instead, put on your dry camp socks and cover each foot with a large Ziploc or Hercules style plastic bag. You can even secure them with a rubber band around your ankle if needed. Well, does that sound ridiculous? Maybe, but it does work. I have tested this out myself. You're not alone, Endeavour Forever. I've tested this out, and it's a clever way to keep your feet warm and dry while cutting unnecessary weight. And if you really need to step outside, you just slip your zip-locked feet into your wet hiking boots or shoes, and your feet stay dry without carrying the extra footwear. And while it's definitely not as warm and fuzzy as dedicated camp shoes, for those ultralight hikers out there, every gram counts, and at less than 30 grams, this trick is definitely worth trying if you want to save a bit of weight. Plus, the bags are cheap, reusable for at least a week, and they're easy to replace. By the way, most of you watching right now aren't actually subscribed to the channel. So if you're enjoying these tips, if you're enjoying the video, then make sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button while you're at it. It really helps the channel, and it lets me keep bringing you the best hiking advice, or some of the best hiking advice out there. Now, saving weight isn't the only way to make hiking easier. What about saving time and effort when you're out on the track? The Bumbag hack. Do you ever feel like you're constantly stopping to dig through your pack just to grab something tiny, maybe a snack, maybe a headlamp, just those little bits and pieces that you want to grab? Maybe it's a lip balm. I don't know, could be anything. Well, at Joshua Brook 324 has a simple fix. Use a bum bag for little things needed often. Things like phone, chapstick, snacks, gloves. It avoids stopping and hauling off the backpack every time you need to get something out. Think of it like a tool belt for hiking. Everything you need right there within reach. No more pulling off your pack every 5 minutes just to grab a muesli bar or reapply sunscreen. I am a big fan of keeping essentials accessible. Now, while I do like hip belt pockets, a bum bag is another fantastic option. It's one I have actually considered, and whenever I suggest it to my hiking mates, they sort of give me a hard time for it. But hey, I'm a proud bum bag fan. In fact, I've got a couple of my own. Tiny change, huge difference. And speaking of small, tiny changes that make a big impact, well, Louise on a Journey has not one, but 3 simple hacks that can save your feet, your tent, and your morning coffee. The triple tip from Louise on a Journey. Blisters, condensation, and bad coffee. 3 things that can ruin a good hike. But Louise on a Journey has a hat trick of simple fixes. 2 socks on each foot to avoid blisters. An absorbent cloth to wipe away condensation/moisture from inside your tent, and always bring a bit of extra coffee. Now let's break these down. Double socks tends to equal no blisters. Wearing a thin liner sock under a thicker one reduces friction and helps prevent those painful hot spots. Now, while I don't tend to use this so much these days, as blisters aren't really a problem for me anymore, I've used this trick on long hikes in the past, and it is a lifesaver, especially when your boots are fairly new and you're still sort of breaking them in a bit. It can be a real lifesaver. And the next tip from Louise on a Journey was a sponge for tent condensation. And I am a big fan of this as well. I always carry a small piece of sponge or something like that because it's really useful for wiping away the moisture that can build up on the inside of the tent in the morning. So as you're packing up, you can wipe the tent down, you can wipe down the outside as well, the fly, if it's been raining, and just get a lot of that moisture off before you have to pack up your gear. And the third tip from Louise on a Journey was extra coffee. Well, I do like my morning coffee, and extra coffee equals extra happiness in my book. And I find that camp coffee can make or break the morning. A little extra stash, a little bit of extra coffee never hurts. I've personally used all of these little tips out in the track, and they're solid. Small, lightweight, and they make a big difference when you're out hiking. But what about when the real challenge begins? Waking up the next morning with legs that feel like concrete. The end of day leg saver. So maybe you've got tired legs after a long hike. Well, Craigie Deemer 1707 has a counterintuitive but genius little trick. A short walk at the end of the day without your pack helps loosen up tired muscles. And you might be looking at me saying, well, Mouser, that just sounds crazy. Why would I go walking around after a massive day of hiking? But I'll tell you what, moving a little after a long hike helps loosen up your muscles so you don't wake up feeling like a rusty old machine the next day. I always do this after huge days on the track, and trust me, it does work. It makes a big difference, even when I'm struggling to sort of just trot around a bit at the end of the day. So give it a try on your next big hike. But hiking isn't just about pushing your limits, it's also about enjoying the journey at your own pace. Hike your own hike. Josh Edwards, 3032, drops some solid hiking wisdom. Hiking isn't a competition to get to the campground the fastest, and it's not about number crunching. Hike your own hike, take nothing but photos, and leave nothing but footsteps. I love this tip, and in many ways it reminds me of a quote by the famed Tasmanian photographer Peter Dombrovskis, who said, "When you get out there, you don't get away from it all, you get back to it all. You come home to what's important, you come home to yourself." Some people treat hiking like a speed run, but the best hikes happen when you go at your own pace, enjoy the track, and stop worrying about everyone else. Take breaks, soak in the views. It's not about the numbers, it's about the experience. And speaking of truly appreciating the track, well, the most liked tip from this survey was a simple reminder that we all need to think about from time to time, or be reminded of from time to time, one of the two. The most liked tip at EndMP25 keeps it simple. They say, stop, look around, take a deep breath of air, remember this moment during your hike. Hiking isn't just about reaching a destination. Some of the best track memories come from pausing and appreciating where you are. We all rush sometimes, but don't forget, this is why you're out here. And it's something that I remind myself to do on every hike. I take myself aside for a minute when I'm out on the track, take a deep breath of air in and just take in the views, soak in the sounds, and just think, how lucky am I to be out here? There is some absolute gold in all of these tips that you've shared today. A huge thanks to everyone who shared their hiking wisdom. Now, over to you. What is your best hiking tip? If you haven't left a tip yet, drop it in the comments down below and I might feature it in a future video. If you found these tips helpful, then check out this video up here where I share some of the most brutal lessons that I have learnt on the track in over 34 years.